official government archaeologist, so she got to be there first, because she's the official one. So then other people that believe the Bible were true would come in behind her, and then they'd say, well, we didn't find something at this exact location. So then they'd look at it again, and they'd move over a few hundred feet and dig, and they'd move over a little bit and dig, and in a few months, they'd find what they were looking for. But if you're an archaeologist and you don't want to find something, you can actually make it so you don't find something. And this is the shrine of the book that houses the Dead Sea Scrolls in Israel, and that's under Johnny Wong. And that was built, and it's got like this unique roof on it. And the roof is actually meant to be a replica of what the clay pots, the covers, the scrolls were found in clay pots, and then they had covers on them, and that roof is meant to be a copy or a replica of the covers of the clay jars that they found those scrolls. I'm going to read a few things about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Has anybody ever seen the Dead Sea Scrolls at all in person? You've heard of them or seen them in a book? Several years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, they were in St. Paul. There were some fragments. That was in the Science Museum in St. Paul. That's the first that I've seen them. It's actually pretty interesting. You see some of the old pictures in the 1940s, and they have these fragments that they found, and then they're there looking at them, and then they're smoking a cigarette, and the ashes are falling on the fragments. And it took them a long time to figure out how the correct way to preserve them would be, and it just took a while for them to get it figured out and start to do things the right way. I want to read a few things, a few interesting facts about the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 11 caves along the northwest shore of the Dead Sea between the years of 1947 and 56. The area is 13 miles east of Jerusalem and is 1,300 feet below sea level. The mostly fragmented texts are numbered according to the cave that they came out of. They have been called the greatest manuscript discovery of modern times. And only caves 1 and 11 produced relatively intact manuscripts. Discovered in 1952, Cave 4 produced the largest find, about 15,000 fragments for more than 500 manuscripts were found. In all, scholars identified the remains of 825 to 870 separate scrolls. The scrolls can be divided into two categories, biblical and non-biblical. Fragments of every book of the Hebrew canon, the Old Testament, have been discovered except the book of Esther was not found. There are now identified among the scrolls 19 copies of the book of Isaiah, 25 copies of Deuteronomy, and 30 copies of the Psalms, which I think when I saw them at the Science Museum, I thought that the identified book of Isaiah was the most identified book at that point in time. So the research into it is ongoing. Prophecies by Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Daniel not found in the Bible are written in the scrolls. The Isaiah scroll, found relatively intact, is 1,000 years older than any previously known copy of Isaiah. In fact, the scrolls are the oldest group of the Old Testament manuscripts ever found. In the scrolls are found never before seen psalms attributed to King David and Joshua. There are non-biblical writings along the order of commentaries on the Old Testament, phrases that expand the law, rule books of the community, war conduct, thanksgiving psalms, hymn compositions, benedictions, liturgical texts, and wisdom writings. The scrolls are for the most part written in Hebrew, but there are many written in Aramaic. Aramaic was the first 2 centuries AD. The discovery of the scrolls has greatly enhanced our knowledge of these two languages. And there's also a few texts written in Greek. The scrolls appear to be the library of a Jewish sect, and they were found in the caves near that sect that was called the Essenes. They think that the library was hidden away in caves around the outbreak of the first Jewish revolt as the Roman army advanced against rebel Jews. And the caves are near the ancient ruins of Qumran. They were also, that site was also excavated in the early 1950s. It appears to be connected with the scrolls. And they think that the scrolls were most likely written by the Essenes during the period from 200 before Christ to 68 AD. And the Essenes are mentioned by Josephus, the Jewish historian, and a few other sources, but they're not listed in the New Testament. The Essenes were strict Torah observant, they were messianic and apocalyptic, and they practiced baptism. They were led by a priest they called the teacher of righteousness. And it's thought that he was opposed and possibly killed by an establishment priesthood in Jerusalem. And in these scrolls, they have some documents that document the last words of Joseph, Judah, Levi, Naphtali, Amram, who's the father of Moses, on some of the scrolls. One of the most curious scrolls is the copper scroll. It was discovered in cave number 3. And this scroll records a list of underground hiding places throughout the land of Israel. And it's essentially a treasure scroll that it told of deposits where there were manuscripts and precious metals buried at that time. And there was a temple scroll, and this temple scroll is the longest scroll. And if that scroll is all unwound, it ends up being over 28 foot long. The scrolls are most commonly made of animal skins, but also papyrus and that one of copper. They are written with a carbon-based ink from right to left, using no punctuation except for an occasional paragraph indentation. And in some cases, there are not even spaces between the words. And the scrolls have revolutionized textual criticism of the Old Testament. Because our Bible uses the Masoretic text for the Old Testament in the received text version. And these manuscripts match up excellently with the Masoretic text that we use, like it was in the King James Bible. Since the late 50s, about 40% of the scrolls, mostly fragments from Cave 4, remained unpublished and inaccessible. It wasn't until 1991, 44 years after the discovery of the first scroll, that the general public got access and made available photographs of the scrolls. And there's been more and more access since then. The Dead Sea Scrolls enhance our knowledge of Judaism and Christianity. They represent a form of non-Rabbinic Judaism, which Rabbinic Judaism that is practiced around the world today is heavily influenced by the Babylonian Talmud. So this is a different form of Judaism that was not heavily influenced by that. They show Christianity to be rooted in Judaism, and they've called it the evolutionary link That's how they stay there so long. They're very inaccessible. And then the climate there is just perfect for preserving manuscripts like that. This is the pilot stone. And it's got the name, because it's been said that if Jesus didn't exist, then you have to also say that Pontius Pilate didn't exist either, and that was a made-up character also. But this stone was found in, I believe, the 1960s, 61. And the name Pontius Pilatus appears in Latin on the stone. It was discovered at refuse in Caesarea. The Roman governor describes himself as the Prefectus Judea, or Prefect of Judah. Here Pilate, who commissioned the inscription to honor his imperial benefactor, the Emperor Tiberius, refers to himself in Latin as Pilatus. But beyond that, they've also found a ring at Herodium. And Herodium is it's the mountain fortress of King Herod the Great. This ring, the ring that they found, actually has Pilate's name written in Greek, and it was a sealing ring, and it was just a copper ring, and they think that that was not a ring that Pilate actually wore, but it was one that his servants used as they sealed documents as they were working for Pilate. And they just discovered that ring in about 2018, but they actually excavated it in 1969, and it took from 1969 to 2018 for them to actually figure out what they had with it. And the Cyrus cylinder. I want to read a little bit to you about the Cyrus cylinder. During excavations at Babylon from 1879 to 1882, a Chaldean Christian from Mosul, who had assisted the British lanyard at the excavation of Nineveh, uncovered a baked clay barrel about 9 inches long. This turned out to be the famous inscription known as the Cyrus cylinder, which tells the king's own story of his conquest of Babylon. The cuneiform text impressed on the clay cylinder tells of Marduk seeking a righteous man, then pronouncing Cyrus as the one destined to rule the world. It records how Babylon was taken without a battle, how Cyrus was welcomed by the people, and then by royal edict, the captives were released and permitted to return to their own lands and restore their sanctuaries. And much of what we read on the cylinder can be correlated with the Bible, particularly the book of Isaiah, chapter 44 and 45. And what makes this remarkable and a remarkable parallel, it's so incredible, is that the words of Isaiah were written more than 100 years before Cyrus was born. And in Isaiah, you notice the prophecy that saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd and shall perform all of my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid. And reading into verse 1 of chapter 45, thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loins of kings to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. And the Cyrus cylinder reads, Marduk looked through all the country searching for a righteous ruler. He pronounced the name of Cyrus, king of Bashan, declared him to be ruler of all the world. He made him set out on the road to Babylon, going at his side like a real friend. His widespread troops their number. like that of the water of a river, could not be established, strolled along their weapons packed away. Without any battle, he, Marduk, made him, Cyrus, enter his, Marduk's town, Babylon, sparing Babylon any calamity. So we have a good correlation between the Bible and this cylinder that they found. And this is the Mesha Stela. I want to read you a little bit about the Mesha Stela. One of the most important early discoveries in biblical archaeology was of the Mesha Stela. In what is now modern-day Jordan, this massive stone monument from the 9th century BC was inscribed in an ancient language called Moabite, very similar to Hebrew. And it tells the story of 2 Kings 3 from the perspective of King Mesha of Moab, an enemy of Israel and Judah. In 1868, during the time that the Ottoman Empire ruled the area, a local Bedouin discovered the stela in the ruins of ancient Divan, and later showed it to a German missionary in hopes of selling the artifact. However, the Ottoman government became involved, claiming ownership, and demanded that the stone be given to the Germans rather than be sold, causing the Bedouin herders to retaliate, and they smashed the stone into many pieces. But thankfully, an impression of the stone had been made prior to its destruction, and the recovered pieces were eventually sent to the Louvre Museum in Paris and reconstructed. You can see on that where the original pieces of stone were that they found again after they smashed the monument. And then they used they put it all together based on the roadmap that they had before it was broken. Beginning with the proclamation, the stela begins with the proclamation that Mesha, king of Moab, was the author. And the inscription describes a temple for the Moabite god Chemosh that Mesha had built in commemoration for the victory over Israel. That's from 2 Kings 23:13 is the parallel Bible text for that. It then goes on to tell the story of how Omri of Israel and his successors subdued and ruled over Moab until Mesha led a rebellion, killing thousands of Israelite men and dedicating the women to a Moabite god. And that's in 2 Kings chapter 3. One line of the stela also has one of the earliest references to the house of David, which was the title for the Israelite dynasty of kings started by King David, demonstrating that David was an historical person and the king of Israel. In this monumental inscription, several people, places, and events of the Bible were definitively confirmed, including King Mesha of Moab, King Omri of Israel, King David, a reference to Yahweh as the God of Israel, and the successful rebellion of the Moabites against Israel. Today, 150 years later, the Mesha stela is still one of the most important biblical artifacts that has ever been discovered. And we have the Hittites. In the 19th century, the Bible is accused of being fictitious because no non-biblical texts have been written about the Hittites. In 1906, digs at Hattushash proved that it was the capital city of the Hittites, silencing the skeptical scholars and archaeologists. That was a common complaint from secular scholars that the Hittites were a fictional people and they didn't exist. And in central Turkey, there's a place, and somebody from the west was wandering Oghazkoy in modern Turkey have yielded important information about their political organization, social structure, economy, and religion. The Hittite king was not only the chief ruler, military ruler, and supreme judge, but also the earthly deputy of the storm god. Upon dying, he himself supposedly became a god. The Hittite society was essentially feudal and agrarian, and the common people either being freemen, artisans, like tradespeople, or slaves. Anatolia was rich in metals, especially silver and iron. In the Empire period, the Hittites developed ironworking technology, helping to initiate the Iron Age. Here we have another skeptic's conclusion. As a matter of fact, however, it may be stated categorically that no archaeological discovery has ever controverted a biblical reference. Scores of archaeological findings have been made which confirm in clear outline or exact detail historical statements in the Bible. That's from Rivers in the Desert. And here's a reporter's conclusion. In extraordinary ways, modern archaeology has affirmed the historical core of the Old and New Testaments, corroborating key portions of the story of Israel's patriarchs, the Exodus, the Davidic monarchy, and the life and times of Jesus. That's from Jeffrey Shelter's Is the Bible True? Here we have a scientist's declaration. The grand old book of God still stands. And this old earth, the more its leaves are turned over and pondered, the more it will sustain and illustrate the sacred word. That's from James Dana, the Yale professor. Okay, I want to break this up here. Will get too long. I have a video I'd like to play for you before we close. So we'll be done with